Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. This has been created for those of us that love radical women who live perhaps by the rules, but also question and challenge the status quo. We want more from our lives, to enjoy our sexuality, to explore radical thought, and to celebrate women who have lived and continue to live unconventional lives. Hi, I'm Dr. Tony Baer, sexologist, educator, activist, and definitely a radical woman. Thank you for joining me as I share stories of women challenging the status quo and living life to the fullest. Join me as we unapologetically march to the beat of a different drummer together. Welcome to the Radical Rhythm Podcast. Today we have Marlee Liss with us from Toronto, Canada. And, Marlee, can you introduce yourself? Because I'm sure you can do it much better than I.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Who am I? I do a lot of things. I am a lot of things. So one thing that I do is that I'm a coach for women reclaiming sensuality. So I'll work with women all over the world in healing body shame, reclaiming sexuality, especially after trauma or a lifetime of shame, which a lot of us have, or toxic relationships. So that's part of what I do. And then I'm also an advocate for restorative justice. And of course, I'll share a lot more about my story today around my sexual assault case, becoming one of the first in North America to conclude with restorative justice through the courts. I'm also a queer, Jewish, Sagittarius woman.
And a Canadian, no less.
And a Canadian, yeah.
Hey, all right. So let's start with the big word. I have found that many people do not know what restorative justice is. If you're a restorative justice advocate, what does that mean?
Yeah, most people don't. So restorative justice is rooted in Indigenous, Jewish, Mennonite cultures. And a really simple way of putting it is that it takes an approach to justice that prioritizes repair instead of punishment. So the punitive system, which we're all pretty familiar with, I imagine, is all about, how do we find a suitable punishment for the person who caused harm? Whereas restorative justice says, wow, harm was caused to real people. What can we do about it to help repair that harm? So in my case, and it can look many different ways, there's many different approaches, which is great because it's recognizing different people have different needs. For me, it looked like my assailant going to therapy instead of us proceeding to criminal trial. And then we eventually met in an 8-hour circle.
Okay, so restorative justice in my life is a term that's been used in the School of Education and training teachers. And how do we create a classroom where there is justice, and what do we do if someone breaks the rules of the classroom, and to use a restorative justice strategy? And you're talking about restorative justice in the context of someone who assaulted somebody. And this is not something in the school. This is not somebody calling somebody a name. You're talking about physical violence. Mm-hmm. And in your case, most of the people that I know, now, mind you, I'm from Philadelphia, and it's like the land of Rocky and fighting and boxing and all of that stuff. If someone hurt someone in our family, we just want to hurt them back. We just want, we want to kill them. We want to maim them for hurting someone that we love. Is this something that you believed in before the assault?
So I actually didn't know about restorative justice at all before, not just before this assault, but after this rape. I reported to an officer and started going down the punitive path, went to a preliminary trial, which is like a mini trial to see if there's enough evidence to go to criminal trial. So I went through that system for 3 years, and I didn't know about restorative justice that whole time. It was only when I got subpoenaed for the criminal trial 3 years after the assault that I was in a place where I was like, I think I'm going to drop the charges. And that was because the punitive system felt so wrong to me on so many levels. One being, it's incredibly re-traumatizing, obviously, to take the stand, to be questioned, to have our words twisted as survivors. Like, it's just such a horribly, I would say, abusive experience, the court. And then at the same time, like, something I had been saying to friends for years, but again, I didn't know restorative justice existed, was if this was my world, we wouldn't handle this in a courtroom where I feel like everyone's wearing a costume and it's so medieval, and I'm a Jewish chick that has to swear on a Bible. Like, it just feels so twisted. So I was like, in my world, we wouldn't handle this here. We would be human beings about it. And we'd actually sit down and like cry together, and I'd get to ask the questions that kept me up at night. And there'd actually be some level of closure and a focus on transformation. So I got to that point where I was subpoenaed for the trial, and I said to a friend one last time, that vision, I told her that vision, and she responded to me saying, so make it happen. And I had really deemed that vision delusional, because we're so taught that someone does something bad, especially as bad as rape, they go to prison, like, period, that's how it's done, there's no other option. So I had really deemed that idea delusional, but when she said that, it allowed me to validate that want to enough of a degree that I started doing research. And I was like, okay. And that's when I found restorative justice. And I was like, holy crap, like, the thing that I've been wanting and describing all along actually has a name, and it has roots, and it's been done in communities outside of the court for a long time.
Wow. So, Marlee Liss, this is not just your personal case. This is groundbreaking in Canadian legal history. How does it go from you personally having an idea to something in your country's news reels 3 years later, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it's also one of the first times it's happened in America as well, through the courts. Again, I'll name, like, Indigenous communities have been doing this outside the courts for a long time, along with a lot of Jewish and Mennonite communities. So yeah, it was a journey. So I found out about that, and I started doing research, and I discovered restorative justice. And then I literally put in my Instagram story, does anyone know anything about restorative justice? And someone responded to me saying, oh, I don't know about it, but you should check out this lawyer. I remember reading something about this lawyer online, and that's how I got connected with the lawyer that I worked with. And I'm not too sure about America, but in Canada, rape victims are considered a witness to a crime done to the crown, or a witness to a crime done to the state, which is ridiculous, like, beyond ridiculous. So it's not typical for a victim to have a lawyer representing them. But I went out, I found this lawyer, I told him what I want to do. He's an advocate for restorative justice. We said, okay, let's just get into the prosecutor's office and have a meeting and tell them what we want. And it was a very, very interesting meeting. I almost feel like there was an angel and a devil there. Not actually, like, I don't believe in that kind of rhetoric, but those cartoons of, like, the white person, the red person. So there was two prosecutors in the room when we had that meeting, and one of them was just very clearly a very patriarchally conditioned woman. And I said, I don't want to go to trial. I want to do restorative justice. And she, first of all, was like, oh, sweetie, don't you understand that rape is bad? And I was like, yes. I mean, of anyone in this room, I know that this rape was very bad. Like, I know, thank you. But I said, I believe it's so bad that we have to do something different because what we're doing isn't working. Like sexual assault is not going away. It's not working. And luckily there was another prosecutor in that room who I would identify as like the angel in that little scenario. And she was like, yeah, we do need this. She shared, I've been a prosecutor for over 20 years, and time again, I see victims re-traumatized on the stand. I see rapists acquitted, like let off with no punishment or accountability at all. She's like, when the small percentage of perpetrators do get incarcerated, so often they come out and reoffend again, and they haven't actually changed at all. So she said, yeah, it's not working. I'm here for this. Like, yeah, we should do something different. And they kind of started like battling it out. And my lawyer and I were like, okay, we said our thing. Like, we'll hear from you. And we left, and I had no idea what any of this meant or who this was. And my lawyer was like, that was really epic. Like, one of the prosecutors in that room who was against it, she basically wrote the book on sex crimes in Canada. Like, it's a big deal to kind of step up and challenge her. And I was like, ooh, like, I love that. So then we left, and there was about a month's period where I had no idea what was happening. And on a personal, emotional level, I had to make peace with the idea that this probably wouldn't happen. And in that case, I would just drop the charges, and I wouldn't feel any kind of sense of closure in the way that I wanted. So that was hard, and it was kind of back and forth. Lawyer's like, it's looking good, it's not looking good, it's looking good. Eventually, he calls me about a month later, my lawyer, and said, we got a yes. Like, that one prosecutor advocated hard for you, and your assailant's going to start therapy right away. You'll eventually meet in that circle. You don't have to go back to trial. And that was such an empowering moment. I feel it was the first time that my voice was actually heard since this assault in the system. So that was really incredible. And yeah, he started therapy right away. And then about 6 months later, we sat down in that circle, and it was like an 8-hour process, which I'm sure we'll talk more about.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing you say is that, okay, you started by talking to a friend, and then something a little different from your generation to mine is you went on Instagram, right? And you found an attorney, and then there were 2 attorneys that were opposed, and one advocated for you and won. And the result of that was an 8-hour reconciliation circle.
Along with him being in therapy for about 6 months, which that meant a lot to me. Like, I think the power of, and obviously you do too with your work, like the power of education and resources that allow someone to, first of all, to work through whatever trauma may have led to him causing that harm, and to unlearn all of the misogyny, patriarchal conditioning, rape culture that he was leading his life with, and to actually be supported and resourced in changing in whatever ways possible. Just knowing that all throughout that time that process was happening was so healing for me.
Right. And, as you waited for this circle to happen, I can imagine that you went through a myriad of emotions. And when you look back on it with hindsight, where do you think you derived your personal strength to be able to do this?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, a few things. One thing is that in that time, in those 3 years between the assaults and me learning about restorative justice and asking for that, I was totally focused on my healing because I had to be. Like I was really in that place of like really depressed, really low, struggling with PTSD, wanting to commit suicide at one point. Like I was really in a low place. And I approached my healing in that kind of crisis, do or die way. And then eventually that just kind of became a part of my life in a less urgent way, but I just fell in love with like communities that are focused on healing and somatic healing and all these different modalities that allow us to like feel safe in our bodies. So that looks like therapy, working with an Indigenous elder. At some points it involved like living on tantric communes to focus on sexual empowerment, like so many different things. And then I did a yoga teacher training. I started studying somatic sex education, all these different things to really heal myself. I wasn't like, oh, I'm going to be an epic leader and teach people. I was just like, I need these tools. So in that time, my worldviews and the way I went through life was really changing from all of that. And at the same time, I was studying social work and learning a lot about like false narratives of individualism and the way that we're taught to believe that a rapist is a bad seed. And what I learned in social work and through all these things was like, I don't actually believe that anyone's born as a bad seed. Like I've never looked at a baby and been like, this is an evil, bad baby. Like, you know,
Right.
But I do believe that we experience trauma and conditioning, and we take in all these societal messages that can lead to really, really horrible behavior. So it just, on a logical level, it didn't make sense to me. Like I actually feel it would have taken more strength, air quotes, on some level to go back to court, because it didn't make any sense to me, whereas the circle did. I was like, this is actually for my healing, and the other one is opposing my healing. So
yeah. How long was it from the event to the circle?
From the rape to the circle, I guess it was it was like 3 or 4 years. I think it was 4 years.
Okay.
2016 to 2019. Yeah.
And you went on this journey of healing, and you did many different things. And then I'm guessing that the circle would be the climax of your process of healing.
Definitely. So I think it's so important to name that, like, can I swear on here?
Sure.
Yeah,
please.
That I was like shitting my pants walking into that room. Like I think a lot of people are like, oh wow, what a brave thing. And they picture this like kumbaya moment. And I'm like, no, like my body was literally shaking. And this person was a stranger to me. So I had seen him during the assault, in that courtroom at the preliminary trial, and then now in the circle. Like those were the only times I'd seen this person. So that was really scary. And what I'll say too is, from the moment I got that phone call telling me that restorative justice was going to happen, I'd say for about 5 months, I was actually in a state of celebration. And it felt like I had been through hell in the years before that, since the rape. And that was like like feeling the light moment, like spring is returning, I'm through the winter. Like I just felt so empowered by my voice being heard, and by validating my own wants and vision of the world enough to act on it, versus being like, okay, I guess this is how the world is, and getting really bitter and giving up on everything. I was just like, so much faith was kind of restored through that. So I was definitely celebrating for about 5 months. And then a month before the circle, it hit me on like a very human level. And I was like, holy shit, like, am I actually going to do this? I'm terrified, like all of these things. So walking into the circle, and I'll add as well, restorative justice takes a community-oriented approach. So it acknowledges that I'm not the only person affected by this, but it's also shaped my mom's life and my sister's life and my dad's life, right? So I actually had my mom and my sister with me in this circle as people who were also impacted.
So, Marlee, what is your takeaway from the circle? What is your learning from it?
Hmm. Um, I guess just realizing that this is actually possible. Like I was definitely never taught that closure can be found after something as horrible as rape. I've never seen that ever. And even though it was a very intense 8-hour process, we did get to that place of what felt like reconciliation. And it just really showed me that transformation is not some delusional concept. It's not going to work in every single case, but it showed me that most of the time it can. And one more thing is like learning to just trust my own gut and validate what I actually want and say like my desires are valid. I shouldn't discount them. I should act and fight and advocate to make them happen because there's something there. There's something in that.
Great. And to wrap this show up, and if you would be so kind as to come back, I think there are so many more questions that I'd like to ask. But when you look at this process that you've gone through, your case has affected the country of Canada and the legal system of Canada. What would you say the impact of this case was, looking back at it just a couple years ago?
I think one of the biggest things is awareness. I think most people don't know that restorative justice exists. I don't know any survivor who experiences sexual trauma and says, "Oh, I'm going to call my local restorative justice agency." Like it's just not part of our mainstream rhetoric. And so I've seen that starting to shift. I've heard from like thousands of survivors all over the world who are advocating for this. And so I see the demand and awareness for it increasing. And I see more and more Crown attorneys, prosecutors, lawyers saying, I'm an advocate for this and I want survivors to be able to access this if it's what they want.
Marlee, you have affected so many individuals, a whole nation, and a legal system at 26 years old. And I am so impressed, and I look forward to having you back on the program again to talk about your advocacy and work with trauma survivors. If someone would want to contact you, how would they contact you, and where should they write and where should they look?
Yeah, thank you so much. Definitely follow me on Instagram. That's my main platform. It's Marlee Liss, MarleeLiss. I also just launched my podcast, which I'd love to have Tony on. It's called The Sensual Revolution. So definitely check that out as well. And I always say I'm a human. So if there's anything about my story that you're curious about, you want to know more, you want to share something, please feel free to DM me and I'll get back to you.
Thank you so much, Marlee. Your story is inspiring, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Tony Baer, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonybaeredd.com. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine. Thank you for listening to the Radical Rhythm podcast today. It has truly been my pleasure to invite guests and talk to you about my passion, the joy in our sexuality, and radical women who march to the beat of a different drum. If you'd like to work with me, Dr. Tony Baer, I have a community where I give seminars every month. I also have a coaching program, both group and individual, and also a course, a self-directed course, because it's all about experiencing the joy life has to offer. I'd love to work with you. Check out my link below, www.tonybaeredd.com. See you next week, and don't let anyone dim your shine.